All right, today is the 16th, so what that means is basically we're about a week ahead of time, which I think is a good thing. All right, and we are going to start on chapter 1 in just a few minutes. But if you notice, what you are asked to do for at least for the first few chapters is you are supposed to work on the exercises that are in the book. In other words, kind of like the practice ones that we did in the other book, the ones that go throughout the chapter. And I want you to do that at least for the first 2 or 3 chapters. Some of it may seem like busy work, but I think it's going to help hopefully at least get the fundamentals down. All right? And then, as it says, you will have to do the individual projects 1.1 through 1.5 at the end. We'll talk about all this stuff in just a minute. But the plan is that today we are going to get through all of chapter 1, and then basically the rest of the week will be lab for you to work on all this stuff, and we'll keep doing that. All right? That should allow us to, between now and the end of the semester to have a week for chapter 1, one for chapter 2, for 3, for 4, for 5, for 6, for 8, and for 12. All right? And that shouldn't be any kind of problem, and then there should still be a little bit of time left. We'll see how it goes as we go on. Now, I do want all of you to know that this morning I emailed you, and there's a very short article that I sent to you, and it's got a couple of examples in it. I want to go over that first. It's called Hello World, Your First JavaScript Program. All right, so I'm going to have both the article up here and the examples. And I took the examples and broke them into 2, kind of like they did in the book, or in the article rather, but there's 3 or 4 examples in the first part and then 1 in the second part, so I want to talk about it. All right. Now, if you don't know this, and we think we mentioned this last time, that if you type in this console.log, so in other words, if I go into a program, okay, so if I come in here and I type in just this, I'm going to take everything else that I have in here and I'm going to comment it out. All right, so everything that's in here, notice I've got script lines, but there's nothing inside of them. So the only thing that's in here is console.log. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to take it, and I'm going to run it. And you go, that's nice, Jeff, not a thing happened. Not true. If I hit the F12 key, what you'll notice is in the console down at the bottom, it did show Hello World. The reason that I'm telling you that is the console is one thing that you can use when you're going in and you're trying to debug your program. All right? So that's the first thing, just to tell you that. Now I want to very quickly, go through this article and just hit on a couple what I consider to be big, kind of major points. All right. Now, JavaScript is an interpreted language. You may or may not have heard me give this analogy before, possibly Colin has in the other class, I don't know. Many programming languages are compiled. JavaScript is interpreted. What that means is, and again, maybe not the best example, but the one that I use for this, is imagine that Matthew and I are going to have a discussion, all right? And it's good news and bad news. The good news is he's here, I'm here, we can have the discussion. The bad news is I only speak English, he only speaks French. So we really cannot communicate with one another. Well, the good news is Colin walks by and he knows both languages. So he's going to be our interpreter, all right? If we are using a language that's interpreted, we're going to suppose that although Colin has a really good understanding of French, occasionally there are words that somebody says, he's like, geez, I don't know how to convert that from English into French. So he also has with him an English to French dictionary and a French to English dictionary. Does that make sense? All right. So I start talking, and I'm going, and I'm talking like this right now. So I'm going pretty fast, and he's he's doing the interpretation. All of a sudden he goes, wait a minute. I don't know what that word means. So he's got to quick look it up. So he looks it up, and now he can interpret that, and now I can keep going. Then he comes up with another word that he can't get. But the idea is as soon as there's something he cannot understand, the program stops. All right? His interpretation stops. In much the same way when you're using an interpreted programming language and the system comes up with an error that it can't understand, by and large, normally what it does is it just stops. So if you want to write alert, you want to do a JavaScript alert statement, and you want to type in ALERT, for alert, but you accidentally type in alerf, the program's going to stop because the interpreter doesn't understand. It sees the word alerf and it thinks, okay, the first thing it does is it says, is there a built-in JavaScript function named alerf? No. Is there a user-defined function named alerf? No. Then I don't know how to handle this. So I'm going to stop. Bless you. All right. Does that make sense? Now, on the other hand, with a compiled programming language like Java, all right, for example, it goes through your entire program and it ticks off all the things it doesn't understand and it puts them, for lack of better words, in a list. But it goes through the entire program. So with an interpreted language like JavaScript, every time there's something that it doesn't understand, it basically refuses to go on, as opposed to a compiled programming language. So that's what they talk about here. Now, although JavaScript mainly runs in the browser, and that's probably, it used to be that was 100% of how it was used. JavaScript ran in the browser, that was it. Now there are products like Node.js, and there are other ones that allow you to run JavaScript in the server. That's getting more and more popular as time is going on, all right? Now, we may have talked about this before. They talk about the 3 layers of the web. So in other words, the author is saying most websites have these 3 components: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. For the first 35 days of this class, this is day 35, so the first 34 days of this class, we have been concentrating on HTML and CSS exclusively. Now we go into the JavaScript part. So notice HTML is used to mark up the content. I would even go further than that. HTML is the content. It's all the paragraphs that you put onto a page. It's the images you put on the page. It's the bulletized lists you put on the page, etc. That's the HTML. The way that you present that, the way that you style it, that's the CSS. And again, we've gone through both. Now we're going into JavaScript because we want to be able to add interactivity. We've actually added a little interactivity already, whether you realize that or not. When we got into talking about forms and we used the built-in form stuff in HTML5, if you remember, if we made a field required, for example, and boom, you hit enter and there was nothing in that field, you got an error message. What you may or may not know is what HTML5 does is behind the scenes, it writes JavaScript to do that. That is JavaScript that was running. All right, if we set up a pattern where we said a phone number had to look a certain way and we violated that, we got an error message. That was JavaScript that was written. So you've already looked at it, but not really in any depth or breadth of coverage. All right. What's considered to be the best way to do things is to keep all of this stuff separate. So much in the same way that we went in and we first learned HTML, then we learned CSS, and we learned there were 3 ways to put CSS into an HTML file. You can put it in there directly with using span tags. That's called inline CSS. That's the worst way to do it. You can do it between style tags, which is called internal CSS, which is better than inline, but not as good as the other way, which is using an external file. All right. In much the same way, what you're going to see in these examples I'm going to show you in just a couple minutes is you can do it sort of the same way with CSS. You can put it right inline, or you can put it in internally, or you can put it in externally. We're going to shoot for putting all of our stuff in externally from the get-go. All right? When you do that, when you have JavaScript in its own file, when you have CSS in its own file, and you just link to those files, that's called, for the JavaScript part, unobtrusive JavaScript. When you have JavaScript inside of your HTML file, either through script tags or other ways that I'm going to show you in just a couple minutes, that's obtrusive JavaScript. You want to shoot for always having unobtrusive JavaScript. So they've got a bunch of examples in here, and I'm going to run through those in just a minute. Before we do, the first thing to realize is you cannot do this. You can't have a self-closing script tag in JavaScript. You must do it like this. Put in an ending tag. You have to do that. That's just a rule that whoever created this stuff set up. So the way in gray will not work. The way that's now in gray will work. And you must do it that way. All right. Then the next thing they talk about is the difference between graceful, degradation, and progressive enhancement. And I think I talked about this already. I'm going to say it one more time. It's going to find its way onto one of your written tests. I don't know when, but it will. All right? And as far as this goes, when you gracefully degrade and you progressively enhance, they're the opposite of one another. All right? So with graceful degradation, you give everybody, all right, you set up a site so it's written as though everybody has the best browser in the world with every feature that exists, etc. So you expect that people have the best, whatever it is it happens to be. And if they don't have it, they don't have it. The example the author gives here is not a bad one. All right, I know, for example, I've got Charter, and I can turn on channel 4, and when I turn on channel 4, it gives me the local CBS station. But if I put on channel 704, it gives me the local CBS station in high def. What's the difference? Have you ever looked at that on your TV screen where you've got a regular one and there's like maybe a few inches to the left and to the right that are just dark? Whereas if you got the high def, it takes up the whole screen. That's kind of what they're saying here. All right. So when you gracefully degrade, you basically assume that the person has everything. All right, and then you can work your way down in case they don't. When you progressively enhance, it's the opposite. You assume they have nothing, and then you build your way up. All right, it's like, well, don't you get the same thing either way? If a person has the best browser and has JavaScript turned on, there's no difference. That's not how most people are. All right? All right. Progressive enhancement, it says it's the process of building a web page from the ground up. So you start with nothing and you work your way up. And they say an example might be a phone company that offers the basic level of phone calls, but you have to start paying more. So if you want caller ID, you pay more. If you want three-way calling, you pay more. If you want the ability to conference call, you pay more. So you can have all that stuff, all right, but you have to pay more, type of an idea. All right. So before we go into this second JavaScript program, I want to show you these examples that are here. I showed you the console log. I don't think that's a big thing one way or the other. I think everybody can understand the console log. All right, so here is the first one that I want to show you. And I don't assume that this is going to make a boatload of sense to you, which is okay. But I'm taking this one line of code. All right, this one line of code, and you may or may not remember when we ran the program before, there was nothing in there. Literally, that was it. That was the result when we ran the program. We could look at the console log, but there was nothing in there. Now notice the difference. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run it again. And you notice, wow, we got a button, big deal. And if we click the button, all right, we get an alert. That's an alert dialog box that comes up and it says, hello world. That's all it does. All right, and none of these programs that are in this example here are going to do a whole heck of a lot. But what I want you to understand is looking at that right there, we get that from this. This is kind of like using a span tag when we started talking about CSS. If you remember, I showed you an example where we said once upon a time and I made the O really big. This is the same kind of thing. What we're saying here is, I want to create a button. Bless you. I want the ID for that button to be button. So in other words, its name is button. We could have called it anything. And what we're saying is, we don't want it to do anything. So when we click it, we don't want it to go anywhere. But when we do click it, we want an alert to come up that says, hello world. This is calling JavaScript right here, right from inside of our HTML. Does that make sense? And although you can do that, that's considered the worst way of doing things because the JavaScript is now obtrusive. You're putting it right inside of your HTML. You should shoot to not do that. All right? And it's like, well, if I do it, is it bad? It's not a question of being bad or good. The idea is you should keep JavaScript in its own files, HTML in its own files, and CSS in its own files. All right? So that's the first example. And you saw exactly what it did. So I'm going to comment this example out. And I'm going to uncomment the second example. All right? So if you notice here, it says button ID, click, etc. Well, to do that, now I've got to uncomment all of this stuff. Because what I'm doing now in here, in this example, is it's kind of like using a style tag that we did in CSS. But instead, I'm using a script tag. So what I'm doing right here is the same thing we did before, but now instead of calling the alert directly, now we're calling a function called clickMe. And the system notices, oh, that's basically inside of here. All right, in fact, I think it's in here. We're going to find out. Because that's clickMe right there. So let's see. I'm going to comment this out and see if this still works. There's the button. There's my hello world. Okay? Exact same output I had before. So what's the difference? All right? It's calling this. Now, this right here, if you look at this, this is the same thing that we have in here. Except here it's in its own file, and here it's in the same file. All right? This is another thing you should try not to do. This, again, is obtrusive JavaScript. In other words, we are writing the JavaScript right inside of our HTML. Unless you are specifically told to do that in your book, you should never do that. And when you start taking your hands-on tests, you got 4 more hands-on tests. 1 on 1 and 2, 1 on 3 and 4, 1 on 5 and 6, and 1 on 8 and 12. And for every one of those, when you're asked to do JavaScript, you will be expected to put it in an external file. Everybody hear that? If you don't, you're going to have points taken off. Even if your program works perfectly, you're still going to have points taken off. All right? So what is this doing? Well, you know what this word means already because we talked about that last week. It's a constant. All right? So we're saying BTN, short for button. We could have used the word button, but BTN equals document.getElementById button. The hell is that? That's saying I want you to go find something with an ID of button, which is right there. All right, and I want you to use an alias. So rather than me having to say document.getElementById button, now I can just say BTN. Does that make sense? I'm creating a local variable that's an alias of that. So rather than having to type all that stuff in gray, I only have to type these 3 letters. All right. Now I'm saying I'm adding what's called an event listener. And you've got to look at it this way. This isn't the greatest explanation, but most programming languages, and JavaScript is one, are what are known as event-driven programming languages. In other words, they're sitting there waiting for you to do something. When you do something, typically, you initiate an event. So the system will handle the event if you wrote any code to handle the event. The event in this case is you clicking the button. When you click the button, it's going to call this function. Notice this function does not have a name. It does not have a name, so it's called an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. It does an alert that says hello world, and this looks kind of weird. What is this stuff at the end? Well, if you notice, we've got function, paren, paren, then we've got a curly brace. And you see where that curly brace is? That's the beginning of it. That's the end of it. Okay? And you say, well, that's fine. Then what about this thing that's right here? Notice what that goes with. Okay? What I've done in the past is I think I've spent too much time working with students and teaching them JavaScript as a pure programming language, and not enough time teaching them JavaScript as the language of the web. Because we spend so much time and we get so bogged down in learning programming principles that we don't spend enough time doing this. That ain't happening no more. All right? You're going to learn this almost from the start, and that's one of the reasons I brought this particular example up here. All right? All right, and then finally, I'm going to take this one that we just did, and I'm going to comment it out. So I'm commenting this out, and I'm going to comment out everything that's in here. Yeah, I'll just do it like this. Comment it out, comment it out, comment it out, and comment it out. All right? I can even comment this one back out. It doesn't matter. All right. So now I want to put in the last example that we're going to have. All right? And if I do that example out, nothing's going to happen because I have to take this and I have to comment that out. What does that say? That's saying that it's going to look for a file called main.js, which is this file that I'm now going to comment or uncomment. It's the same exact code that you just saw that was embedded inside of our document, but now it's outside. All right, and again, what we want to tell it is, hey, when you run this program, let's see what happens right now if we run it. I don't think anything, but I could always be wrong. Oh, it does work, okay. So someplace in here, thank you. Yep, that's what I wanted to see. Okay, we still have to set it up so that we've got this. In other words, we have to uncomment this. We still need the button. All right? So now when we put that in, ideally it's going to work exactly like it did before. Of course it wouldn't, right? There it is. But you saw all three of these now in action. You saw the first one where we embedded the JavaScript right inside of the HTML. That's the worst way of doing it because that's totally obtrusive. Then we saw the second way where we did use script tags, but we put the code still inside of the HTML. Again, that's like using the style tags, all right, that we used for CSS. And now you just saw it the third way, which is the best way of doing it. All right. The other thing that they have in this, and like I said, if you get the time and you want to take a look at it, it's a fairly well-written article and it's not real long. They've got this second JavaScript program. All right. They don't have much in here, but if you look, this is what they put in their HTML. I added to it. I put the doc type and all the other good stuff in there. But the title is I can click a rainbow, and you notice there's a button in there. And you also notice that there is a script tag in there. I think somebody in here asked me this before. When you put that script tag in, should you put it at the top in your head section, or should you put it at the bottom in your body section? There's a lot of debate over which one it should be in. All right, the trend today seems to be more that you put it in the body section at the bottom, right before your ending body tag. So right now, this isn't going to have much in it. It's going to have a button again that says click me. When you click it, what should happen is that file should run. All right. Well, what's in that file? It says, now for the JavaScript, open it up and run this code. Some of it is very similar to what you've already seen. So this right here, you've already seen that. That's creating that alias for your button. All right. This is creating what's called an array. Okay? And we're going to have a whole chapter on arrays, but if I can give it to you literally in about 1 minute. I live in an apartment complex. The apartment complex has 8 units in it. When the mail person comes, they open the slot, it comes out, and there's 8 slots. Does that make sense? And it's apartments, I think 17 through 24 or something like that. I don't know what it is. All right? But the point is, each one of those has a number. When you create an array, each one of these has a number. So this is called, basically, that would be rainbow 0, rainbow 1, rainbow 2, rainbow 3, rainbow 4, rainbow 5, and rainbow 6. So that array has got 7 different elements in it that go from 0 to 6. And technically, it's a little bit more than that because this is really called rainbow sub-1. I'm sorry, sub-0. Sub is short for subscript. You're going to learn all that in a whole chapter. The point is, we've got a list now with 7 items in it. And the idea is, with this change thing, what this says, right there, the stuff that you see in gray says, every time I click that button, give me a random number between 1 and 7. Okay? And between 0 and 6. If it's 0, make my background red. If it's 3, make my background green, etc. So that's the idea behind it. All right? And then this last line in here, this does what's called an association. This says, hey, whenever you click the button, call the change event. All right? I don't expect that to totally make sense to you, but it's something that within the next few weeks, you're going to have to understand. You will be writing stuff like this by the time you do your 3rd or 4th test. All right? So, again, not that big of a thing, but just so you see this. So if I go back, I'm going to close this. And now open the second one. So this is the same code that we just looked at. So again, there's the HTML. All I added was the doc type and the HTML command, the ending stuff in here. But it's other than that, it's the same thing they showed. This is exactly what they showed, but I put comments in there, thinking that hopefully it might, if you wanted to take a look at it, it might help you to be able to see what's going on. All right? So there's a comment for everything that's in there. So if I come in and run the HTML, if I click me, notice how every time I'm getting a different, it's going through a random number. Does that make sense? So that was fairly simplistic, but I wanted you to see that. All right, any questions on that? All right, because other than that, if you've got your book with you, feel free to open it up because I'm going to start in about 1 or 2 minutes going over chapter 1, which starts on, page 1. All right, so we're at page 1. Now, the good news is I contacted the publisher and I said, hey,